Hello everyone. This is Raju giving you a lecture on third, fourth, and sixth cranial nerves. First, third cranial nerve is called as oculomotor nerve. The oculomotor nerve is entirely motor in nature and supplies the levator palpebrae superioris and all extrinsic muscles of the eye except the lateral rectus and the superior oblique muscle, which are supplied by the fourth and sixth cranial nerves respectively. Also innervates the sphincter pupillae and ciliaris muscle. So oculomotor nerve starts from the midbrain and is a motor component of this one and supplies the levator palpebrae superior, superior rectus, medial rectus, inferior rectus, and inferior oblique as well. And from the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, the sympathetic component, the ciliary through the ciliary ganglion, synapses, and sphincter pupillae and ciliaris muscle. The functional components are three: somatic efferent and concerned with the movements of the eyeball; general visceral efferent concerned with the accommodation and contraction of the pupil; general somatic afferent concerned with the proprioception. The nuclear complex made up of a cell column and discrete nuclei from the midbrain. It lies ventral to the gray matter around the cerebral aqueduct at the level of the superior colliculus. Here you can locate the nucleus, the third cranial nerve. Superiorly, it approaches the floor of the third ventricle. You can see the floor of the third ventricle, and inferiorly, it continues with the trochlear nerve nucleus. It consists of main oculomotor nucleus, large multipolar cells, Edinger-Westphal or accessory oculomotor nucleus, small multipolar cells. Main motor nucleus, centrally placed caudal nucleus, supplies to both levator palpebrae superioris, and four laterally paired subnuclei that innervate the superior, inferior rectus and inferior obliques and medial rectus as well. The axons from one superior rectus subnucleus cross and pass through the opposite superior rectus subnucleus to innervate the contralateral superior rectus. Thus, a lesion of one superior rectus subnucleus results in bilateral superior rectus palsy. The levator palpebrae superioris has bilateral supply, while all other extraocular muscles get ipsilateral supply. And different fibers from the third nucleus pass through the medial longitudinal fasciculus. It's a core-cell relation. Passes through the medial longitudinal fasciculus. You can find here for medial longitudinal fasciculus downwards. Red nucleus, then substantia nigra, and medial aspect of the cerebral peduncles. Then these are the relations. Red nucleus you can find. Substantia nigra you can find some midbrain section. Then emerges from the ventral aspect of the midbrain and pass into the interpeduncular space. And the nerve descends anteriorly in interpeduncular fossa between the posterior cerebral and superior cerebral arteries. You can find the cerebral arteries. Between them it emerges and unaccompanied by another cranial nerve. So passing forward it and is superior-medial to trochlear nerve and inferolateral and parallel to posterior communicating artery. You can see posterior communicating artery and pierces the dura mater between the free and attached margin of tentorium to reach the cavernous sinus. And it travels the posterior part of the roof of the sinus to reach its lateral wall, coronary sinus. In the wall, trochlear nerve and first and second divisions of trigeminal nerve are inferolateral to it. You can find. This is the third cranial nerve. This is the fourth cranial nerve. This is a cavernous sinus. Adjacent nerve and the internal carotid artery also inferior-medial to this internal carotid artery. And this is the sixth cranial nerve. And this is how we can trace the third nucleus and the third cranial nerve reaching the eye area. At the anterior part of the sinus now divides into a small superior and inferior branches. These two divisions of nerve enter the orbit through the middle part of the superior orbital fissure. It's called as annular ring of Zinn. You can see. The nerve is crossed by the trochlear nerve, which become the superior-medial to it. And abyssal now lies first inferior, then lateral to the divisions of the nerve. Trochlear, frontal, and lacrimal nerves traverse the fissure above the angular ring of chin. Here, this ring you can find the oculomotor division, superior division, and the inferior division. In between them, the nasociliary nerve and abyssal nerve. Here we can find the trochlear nerve. Two divisions. Superior division diverges radially above the optic nerve and behind the nasociliary nerve. Supplies to superior rectus and levator palpebrae superioris muscles. Inferior division is to supply the inferior oblique, inferior rectus, and inferior oblique medial rectus. It gives 2 to 3 branches to the inferior oblique and also supplies a ramus to the ciliary ganglion. This is how the ciliary ganglion can be located. Roots of ciliary ganglion: sensory root, parasympathetic root, and sympathetic root. The sensory root comes from the nasociliary nerve. Parasympathetic root arises from the nerve to inferior oblique muscle, and sympathetic root is a branch from the internal carotid plexus. This is how the ciliary ganglia they will reach internal carotid artery and ophthalmic nerve, nasociliary nerve, then the parasympathetic fibers, the ciliary nerves, the sympathetic fibers, sensory fibers can be located. Giving 15 to 20 short ciliary nerves contains fibers of all 3 roots of ciliary ganglia. Next, Edinger-Westphal nucleus, parasympathetic nucleus, interposed between 2 main nuclei, composed of small multipolar cells of preganglionic autonomic type. Preganglionic neuronal axons from this form the visceral component of oculomotor nerve, earlier regarded as pupillomotor center. And these are the location of the pupillomotor fibers. The part of the oculomotor nerve which lies between the brainstem and cavernous sinus, the pupillomotor parasympathetic fibers are located superficially and superomedially. Oculomotor nerve gets blood supply from the various branches of basilar artery. The functions: elevation of a lid, levator palpebrae superioris. All movements are high except the lateral and down and out movements. Meiosis is condition called accommodation and light reflex. They're all related with the third nerve. The syndromes related to the Clad syndrome, North-Nagel syndrome, Weber syndrome, Benedict syndrome. Exotropia is condition. And trochlear nerve, it is purely motor nerve, supplies only superior oblique muscle. The nerve is named for the trochlea, the fibrous pulley through which the tendon of the superior oblique muscle passes. It is crossed most slender, smallest nerve and has longest intracranial force, 7.5 centimeters of all cranial nerves. It is only cranial nerve to emerge from the dorsal aspect of the brain. The only cranial nerve that emerges from the dorsal aspect. The functional component: somatic efferent, concerned with the movement of fiber. Central somatic efferent carries the proprioceptive impulses from the superior oblique muscle and to the mesencephalic nucleus of trigeminal nerve. The trochlear nucleus at the level of situated in the superior border of inferior colliculus of midbrain, and it is a dorsum of the tegmentum of midbrain. Here you can locate the trochlear nerve nucleus. Then from the dorsal aspect it is coming out, you can locate easily. And the dorsal to the medial longitudinal fasciculus it is located. Dorsal to the medial longitudinal, this is the medial longitudinal fasciculus. It continues with the third nucleus superiorly, and from each nucleus now fibers first run laterally to mesencephalic nucleus of fifth cranial nerve, then the somewhat downwards and parallel to the aqueduct. Then the lower border of the inferior colliculus that turn medially to decussate in the superior medullary velum, and hence each superior oblique is supplied from contralateral trochlear nucleus. Remember this word. Each superior oblique is supplied from the contralateral trochlear nucleus. And after crossing superior medullary velum, the nerve emerges on the dorsal aspect of the superior cerebellar peduncle, then curves around the peduncle at upper border of the pons, passes between the posterior cerebral artery and posterior superior cerebellar arteries, while this course now is inferior medial to the three margins of tentorium. Now enters the cavernous sinus, where it is superior medial to the first and second divisions of the trigeminal nerve. Here you can see both cranial nerve, locate easily. It is just lateral to the cavernous sinus. While passing through the sinus, oculomotor nerve was superior medial to the trochlear nerve. Then trochlear nerve crosses over and become itself medial to the at the entry in superior orbital fissure. Cochlear nerve run in upper region of fissure above the annular tendon, where frontal and lacrimal nerves are superolateral to it. Here you can find the cochlear nerve. This is a frontal nerve. The nerve enter the orbit and fans out into the 3 to 4 branches to supply the superior oblique muscle. The number of fibers in intraorbital part of cochlear nerve are greater than its intracranial part. So ultimately, fibers relay in the mesencephalic nucleus of fifth cranial. The function superior oblique muscle is primarily rotates the tip of the eye towards the nose in torsion we call it as, and the secondary movement is depression. Tertiary movement is abduction. Cochlear nerve typically allows the person to view the tip of his or her nose. Cochlear nerve is helpful in observing the tip of the nose. The cochlear nerve palsy. Here you can find the eyeball. Cochlear nerve palsy. Then the abducent nerve, entirely motor in nature, supplies the lateral rectus only. Most vulnerable cranial nerve to damage in traumas involving cranium. Here you can find the cochlear nerve, so supplying the lateral rectus muscle only. Functional component, somatic efferent, lateral movement of eyeball, and general somatic efferent are meant for proprioception impulses. It starts from the nucleus, the large multipolar in floor of fourth ventricle, ventral to the colliculus. This from the pons. It is arising from the pons, and fasciculus of seventh. Here you can find the sixth cranial nerve, which is surrounded. The nucleus is surrounded by the seventh cranial. This type of movement is called as neurobiotopsis. Numerous small multipolar cells intermingled with the large cells, which form the so-called nucleus paraabducens. Fibers from these cells relay in the oculomotor nucleus via the medial longitudinal fasciculus. In the course and relation, different fibers starts from nucleus, traverse through the tegmentum, parapontine reticular formation, and pyramidal tract. Then leave the brainstem at pontomedullary junction, just lateral to pyramidal prominence. Lateral to each abducent, there is the emergence of facial nerve. Here you can find the abducent nerve. Lateral to each one, you can find the facial nerve. Facial nerve is winding around. The between abducent and there is a basilar artery, its formation. And just after emergence, now enters into the prepontine basilar cisterns. Here you can find the nerve has been traced, sixth cranial nerve, through this course. Then it passes upwards, crossed to the base of the skull, and is crossed by anterior inferior cerebellar artery. It pierces the dura below the posterior clinoid and angles towards over the tip of the petrous temporal bone. Petrous part of temporal bone, you can see this area. Then now passes around the inferior petrosal sinus in anterolateral direction under the petroclinoid ligament to enter the cavernous sinus, which is again found in the cavernous sinus. Here we can locate the sixth cranial nerve. Then run forwards almost horizontally, being inferior lateral to inferior carotid artery, its sympathetic plexus. Then abducent nerve usually in the sinus. In the sinus you can find. Then the nerve runs out and anterior end of sinus enters into the superior orbital fissure. It travels the fissure through its middle part within the annulus ring of the gene. At first it is below the division of third, then in between the two divisions, it's lateral to the nasociliary nerve, and in the orbit you can find the abducent nerve. 3-4 filaments enter the ocular surface of lateral rectus muscle behind its midpoint. Functional lateral movement of the eye. Then the abducent nerve palsy appearance in the brainstem fascicle foveal syndrome. Then Billard-Gabler syndrome, in which the abducent and facial palsy contralateral hemiparesis, and Raymond syndrome, in which ipsilateral abducent palsy and contralateral hemiparesis. This is how the abducent nerve palsy can be observed. Injury to the abducent nerve. Eyeball is directed medially, and this is about the third, fourth, and sixth cranial nerves. The third and fourth, sixth cranial nerves. Simply one word: SO4-LR6. Superior oblique is supplied by the fourth cranial nerve, and the lateral rectus is supplied by the sixth cranial nerve, and the remaining all are supplied by the third cranial nerve. Thank you very much.